Hello, this is Chef John from foodwishes.com with crispy bloomed onion. That's right, I've received so many food wishes over the years for me to do a blooming onion video, which for the home cook is very challenging, and even if we somehow pulled it off, we probably would have been better off just making onion rings. Which is why I've come up with this oven-based, no-fry version, which was not only as good as the version you might enjoy out back, but was actually better. And by the way, the reason I'm calling it bloomed onion is because in my culinary fantasy world, this is what would happen if you let a blooming onion actually bloom. So with that, let's go ahead and get started by prepping our onions. And for this, the bigger the better. But don't worry if all your onions aren't the exact same size. Okay, it's still gonna work, since flower petals aren't all the same size anyway. And what we'll do here is cut a little bit off the top, so that it will sit nice and flat on the cutting board. And then we're gonna quarter this by cutting directly through the center of the root. Okay, so cut very carefully. And the reason that's sort of a big deal is that root end is going to hold this all together when we boil them in salted water, which is going to be the next step. And by the way, of course, any large onion will work here. So if you wanted to use like a yellow onion, go ahead. I mean, you are after all the Crocodile Dundee, of which onion this should be. But I think visually the red onion does work the best. And then once those are cut, the only other prep we could do is maybe peel off the skin. Although I guess that's optional, you could probably pull that off once these are cooked. But I did it before. And then once those are prepped, we will head to the stove, where we're going to boil these in some generously salted water. Okay, we're not talking a pinch here. We're talking like a quarter cup. Right, just like when we make pasta, this water should taste like the ocean. And then once we have that up to a rolling boil on high heat, we'll go ahead and carefully transfer in our onions. And we're going to want to cook these for just about 8 to 10 minutes, or until they just start to soften up. Okay, so basically we're just taking off the raw edge here, and not really cooking them all the way through. All right, we just sort of want them to soften and sweeten a little. And as you might expect, we will pull out the smaller ones first. And after about 8 to 10 minutes or so, they should start to soften up, and the layers should separate fairly easily. And as that happens, we'll go ahead and pull them out, pulling those larger pieces out last. And as we're fishing those out, we're going to want to transfer those onto a paper towel-lined pan, with the cut side down so they can drain properly. And what we'll do is simply let those sit there until they cool down to room temp. And thanks to the residual heat in those quarters, they will continue to soften and sweeten as they cool. And while we're waiting for those, we can move on to make our breadcrumb mixture, which is going to happen by adding some breadcrumbs to a pan over medium heat, along with a generous drizzle of olive oil. And what we'll do is toast these to a light golden brown. And while we're doing that, we're going to want to stir fairly constantly with possibly a freakishly small wooden spoon. Or if you want to show off a little bit, you could toss them in the pan. But if you do that, try to make sure most of them stay in the pan. And then what we'll do once those do reach a nice golden brown and look a little something like this is immediately turn off the heat and add the following ingredients, which will include some finely crushed or minced garlic, a nice big pinch of kosher salt, some freshly ground black pepper, as well as a few shakes of cayenne. And then last but not least, some finely and freshly grated Parmesan cheese. And of course, we're using the real Parmigiano Reggiano. All right, except no substitutes. And then what we'll do is go ahead and stir, mix, and mash that all in. And once we feel like it's all been perfectly incorporated, we'll simply set that aside until needed. And by the time that's done, hopefully our onions are now cool. And we can go ahead and cut off that root end, which will allow us to separate these quarters into our onion flower petals. And then what we'll do once that's been accomplished is go ahead and oil up whatever pan we're going to use, which for me is going to be this round pizza pan, because there's no square flowers. But of course, any shape oven-safe pan will work. And then once that's been lubricated, we can start placing on our petals, starting with the largest ones. And we'll go ahead and arrange those around the outside, around the outside, around the outside. And once that first ring is complete, we will continue on until we reach the center. And while you can definitely overlap these a little bit, we don't want to do it too much, because we want to make sure there is plenty of room for our breadcrumbs. So we do want to arrange these fairly tight together, but we don't want them on top of each other. And once that's done, if you wanted to, you could take some of the smaller, pointier pieces from the middle and sort of place those in the center of your larger petals. Otherwise, maybe save those for soup, or a potato salad, or an omelet, or whatever. And that's it. Once we have our onions arranged into a beautiful flower pattern, we'll go ahead and cover that extremely generously with our crumbs, making sure every single petal has at least a teaspoon or two. Oh, and in case you're keeping score at home, Roughly 2 large onions will make enough petals for one of these round pizza pans. And then once our bloomed onion has been copiously crumbed, we'll finish up with a very generous dusting of Parmesan, as well as a little drizzle of olive oil, which is going to help the top brown. Speaking of which, once that's set, we're going to finish this in either a very hot oven or placed under the broiler set on high, which is how I'm doing it, for roughly 5 to 10 minutes, or until everything's beautifully browned and crispy. And if everything's gone according to plan, it should look something like this. And then because this is finger food, we're going to want to let it cool down a little bit before we serve it, which is not only a burn prevention issue, but this bloomed onion is much better room temperature than it is hot. And if you don't believe me, test it for yourself. So I did let mine cool down before serving, at which point I finished up with a little freshly chopped Italian parsley, which I have growing out back. And that's it, our crispy bloomed onion is ready to enjoy. And not only was this way easier and way less messy than trying to deep fry a blooming onion, but when you curl up one of these beautiful, sweet, tender onion petals, with all those super crispy, slightly garlicky crumbs, we've created virtually the exact same experience as that iconic chain restaurant appetizer. Plus, besides all that other stuff I said, every single one of these bites is perfect, which is not necessarily the case with the blooming onion. And if you're thinking, these are kind of like onion nachos, well, I like how you're thinking, because that's what I thought too when I first made them. It's almost as if French onion soup and nachos had a love child. And I probably should have used a different analogy, because now people are trying to picture how soup and nachos would mate. But anyway, the point is, if you like French onion soup and you like nachos, you are going to really love these. But anyway, that's it, what we're calling crispy bloomed onion. Whether you're looking for a new creative and beautiful veggie-based appetizer, or you're simply trying to avoid a trip to the strip mall to get your blooming onion fix, either way, I really do hope you give this a try soon. So head over to foodwishes.com for all the ingredient amounts and more info as usual. And as always, enjoy.